If someone had told me a year ago that my marriage would come to this, I wouldn't have believed them. My name's Ethan, and for the past 8 years, I thought I had a stable life, a good life. Lisa and I built something together. Or at least, that's what I used to think. We had a rhythm. She was the creative one, the spark, while I was the steady hand, the one who kept things grounded. Together, we seemed like the perfect match. We weren't without our struggles, of course. Every marriage has them. But I always thought we had something solid, something unshakable. That belief started to change about a year ago when the cracks began to show. It started small, so small that I barely noticed. Lisa began working longer hours, her phone constantly buzzing with notifications she'd quickly swipe away. When I asked her about it, she'd laugh and say it was just work stress or her friends from the office sharing memes. She had always been independent, so I didn't think much of it at first. But then there were the changes in her behavior. She'd started dressing differently, sleek, tailored outfits that seemed more suited for high-powered meetings than the casual work environment she described. She began hitting the gym more frequently, something she'd never been overly interested in before. When I asked her about the sudden fitness kick, she waved it off, saying she wanted to feel healthier. It was a valid enough excuse, but something about the way she avoided eye contact made my stomach twist. I tried to push the doubts aside. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Lisa was beautiful, confident, and charismatic. It wasn't unusual for people to gravitate toward her. That's part of what I loved about her. But as the weeks turned into months, the distance between us grew. Our conversations became superficial, filled with pleasantries instead of substance. The laughter we used to share was replaced by silence, and our once regular date nights became sporadic, then non-existent. It was around this time that I first heard about Marcus. He started as just another name in Lisa's stories about work, a new hire, a rising star at her company. At first, I didn't think much of him. She mentioned him occasionally, usually as part of a group of coworkers she was collaborating with on a project. But over time, his name began to pop up more and more. Marcus said this, she'd say. Or, Marcus had this great idea for the campaign. She spoke about him with a kind of admiration that made me uneasy, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. When I joked about how much she seemed to talk about him, she rolled her eyes and said, "Don't be ridiculous. He's just a coworker." The first real red flag came when Lisa started staying out late for team dinners. She'd text me around 8 or 9 p.m., apologizing for the late night and promising she'd make it up to me. But when I asked for details about these dinners, her answers were vague. "Just the usual office crowd," she'd say, brushing off my questions. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But something wasn't adding up. One evening, after another one of her late nights, I found myself sitting in our living room, staring at my phone. Lisa was upstairs, already asleep, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I opened her laptop, telling myself it was just to check the calendar for a mutual event we had coming up. But as soon as the screen lit up, an unread email caught my eye. It was from Marcus. The subject line read, "About last night?" My hand hovered over the mouse, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew it would cross a line. But my curiosity, and my growing suspicion, won out. I clicked. The email wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. The tone was friendly, flirtatious, and far too personal for a simple coworker relationship. My stomach churned as I read his casual reference to a private moment they'd shared, a joke that didn't feel like something I should be excluded from. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The cracks in our marriage weren't just cracks anymore. They were gaping holes, impossible to ignore. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility that Lisa wasn't just distant. She was betraying me. I didn't confront her right away. Instead, I decided to wait, to watch, and to gather the truth. Whatever was happening, I needed to know. I needed to see it for myself. Only then would I be able to decide what to do next. The name Marcus began to appear more frequently in our lives, like an uninvited guest who refused to leave. At first, it was subtle. Lisa mentioning his ideas during casual conversations about work, or bringing up how helpful he was on a recent project. "Marcus is such a perfectionist," she'd say with a laugh. "He pushes everyone to do better." I wanted to be supportive, so I played along, nodding and offering the occasional comment. But the more she talked about him, the harder it became to ignore the undertone in her voice. The way her eyes lit up when she described his clever remarks or how he always seemed to have the perfect solution to every problem. The first time I met Marcus in person was at Lisa's company holiday party. I didn't know what to expect, but I certainly didn't expect him. Marcus was tall, lean, and exuded a kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance. He was the kind of guy who filled a room just by being in it, and he knew it. When Lisa introduced us, he smiled that smug, practiced smile, the kind that made my skin crawl. "Ethan," he said, extending a hand, "Lisa's told me a lot about you." "Wish I could say the same," I replied, keeping my tone neutral but firm. Lisa shot me a look, her lips tightening ever so slightly. "Ethan, don't be rude," she said, her voice laced with a forced cheerfulness. "Not at all," Marcus said, his grin widening. "I like a guy with a sense of humor." Humor wasn't what I was going for, but I let it slide. I spent the rest of the evening observing him from a distance, watching the way he interacted with people, especially Lisa. He had a way of positioning himself close to her, leaning in just enough to make their conversations feel intimate. It made my stomach turn. Over the next few weeks, Marcus became a fixture in our conversations. Lisa brought him up almost daily, recounting his latest jokes or insights. She even started using phrases like, "Marcus thinks," or "Marcus says," as if his opinion carried more weight than anyone else's. At first, I tried to brush it off. Maybe she just admired him as a colleague. Maybe I was reading too much into things. But then came the changes. Lisa's wardrobe evolved overnight. She swapped her casual office attire for sleek, form-fitting outfits that made her look stunning but felt out of character. When I commented on it, she shrugged. "I just want to look more professional," she said. Her schedule also became increasingly unpredictable. Late nights at the office turned into working dinners, and she started checking her phone obsessively, her screen lighting up with notifications she always seemed in a hurry to dismiss. "Who's that?" I asked one evening as her phone buzzed for the 5th time in an hour. "Just work," she said without looking up. Work seemed to have a name, and that name was Marcus. One Saturday afternoon, Lisa told me she needed to run errands and would be gone for a few hours. I didn't think much of it until I noticed her phone on the kitchen counter. She rarely went anywhere without it, and curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, hesitating for a moment before unlocking it. The messages were there, flirty, playful text from Marcus. Nothing overtly incriminating, but enough to confirm what I'd been dreading. "Looking forward to Monday already. These weekends without you are too long," one message read. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't a simple work friendship. This was something more. That night, I tried to bring it up with Lisa. I didn't want to accuse her outright, so I framed it as a concern about boundaries. "Don't you think Marcus is a little close?" I asked carefully. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" "It just seems like he's always around. And the way he talks to you." "Stop," she interrupted, her tone sharp. "Marcus is my coworker and my friend. That's it. You're being paranoid." Her defensiveness caught me off guard, but I didn't push further. Instead, I filed the moment away, adding it to the growing list of red flags. The tipping point came a week later when Lisa came home late from yet another team dinner. She was visibly tipsy, her laughter loud and unrestrained as she stumbled through the door. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing," she said, waving me off. "Just something Marcus said." "Of course," I muttered under my breath. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped, her playful demeanor evaporating. "It means I'm tired of hearing his name," I said, my voice rising. "Marcus this, Marcus that. Do you even realize how much you talk about him?" "Don't start with this," she said, rolling her eyes. "You're being ridiculous." But I wasn't ridiculous. I was right. And deep down, I think she knew it. As she disappeared upstairs, I stood in the living room, fists clenched, heart racing. Marcus wasn't just a coworker. He wasn't just a friend. He was something more. And whatever that more was, it was threatening to tear my life apart. It wasn't long before my unease turned into outright suspicion. The signs were all there. Lisa's constant texting, her defensive attitude whenever I mentioned Marcus, the late nights, the unexplained errands. And yet, I still found myself clinging to the hope that I was wrong. That maybe this was all in my head, that I was misinterpreting things because I didn't want to face the truth. But deep down, I knew. The confirmation came one night when Lisa was upstairs in the shower. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, trying to shake off the tension that had been building all day. Her laptop was on the coffee table, the screen glowing softly. She'd left it open to her email, and I could see a notification for an unread message. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But the subject line caught my eye. "I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach dropped. I knew it was wrong to invade her privacy, but at that moment, I didn't care. I clicked on the email. It was from Marcus. The message wasn't explicit, but it was intimate enough to leave no room for doubt. He wrote about how much he enjoyed their time together, how he wished he could see her more often, and how much he admired her. "You're incredible, Lisa. I mean that. Every time I'm around you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." I felt a surge of anger, my chest tightening as I read his words. But what hurt even more was Lisa's reply. "You're sweet, Marcus. You always know how to make me smile." I feel the same way. She felt the same way. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. It wasn't just an emotional affair. It was a full-blown betrayal. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I closed the laptop, stood up, and walked outside. The cool night air hit my face, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside me. I needed to think, to figure out how to handle this without completely losing control. Part of me wanted to barge upstairs and demand an explanation. But another part of me, the calmer, more calculating part, knew that wouldn't accomplish anything. Lisa would deny it, deflect, or worse, try to turn the blame on me. No, I needed to gather more information before making my move. Over the next few days, I kept my distance, watching her closely. She acted normal. Too normal, as if she were trying to cover up the cracks in her facade. She still smiled, still kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, still laughed at my jokes during dinner. But there was an emptiness in her eyes, a distance that hadn't been there before. And then there were the text messages. Every time her phone buzzed, I couldn't help but wonder if it was him. I started noticing patterns, how she'd glance at the screen, smile faintly, and quickly put the phone down, face down. One evening, while she was in the shower again, I couldn't resist. I picked up her phone and unlocked it, my heart pounding in my chest. Sure enough, there were messages from Marcus. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. You looked stunning today. When are we going to stop pretending?" Each message felt like a dagger to the chest. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions and scenarios. How long had this been going on? How far had it gone? Was it just emotional, or had it crossed into physical territory? By the time morning came, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this continue unchecked. Lisa might think she was getting away with it, but she was wrong. I started keeping a closer eye on her. I noted the times she left and returned home, the excuses she gave, the way her demeanor shifted whenever she talked about work. I even reached out to a friend who worked in private investigations, asking for advice on how to confirm my suspicions without tipping her off. "You're sure you want to go down this road?" my friend asked. "I have to," I said. "I need to know the truth." The truth came faster than I expected. One afternoon, Lisa texted me, saying she'd be home late because of a last-minute meeting. But instead of staying home, I decided to follow her. I parked a few blocks away from her office and watched as she exited the building, arm in arm with Marcus. They didn't see me as they walked to a nearby restaurant, laughing and leaning into each other like teenagers. That was the moment everything clicked. There was no more denial, no more excuses. This wasn't just in my head. It was real, and it was time to confront it. The night Marcus showed up at my house was the tipping point. For weeks, I had been holding everything in. Lisa's betrayal, Marcus's smug arrogance, and my growing frustration at being treated like a fool in my own marriage. But I wasn't expecting him to take things to such a bold, disrespectful level. It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting in the living room with a beer in hand, pretending to watch the news. Lisa was out, as usual, claiming she was working late, which had become her favorite excuse lately. I was in no mood to argue. My focus was on figuring out how to deal with everything I'd uncovered. Then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I approached the door cautiously. When I opened it, there he was, Marcus, standing on my porch with that same arrogant smirk I had seen at Lisa's office party. He was wearing a tailored suit, his posture casual, as if he owned the place. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice low and steady, though my fists clenched at my sides. "Ethan," he said, his tone dripping with faux charm. "I thought it was time we had a little chat. You and I, man to man." I stared at him, not moving from the doorway. "We have nothing to talk about." "Oh, I think we do," he said, stepping closer. "You see, Lisa's been struggling lately. She needs someone who understands her, someone who can give her what she really deserves." I felt the heat rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And you think that's you?" He shrugged, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Let's not pretend, Ethan. She's already made her choice. I'm just here to help you accept it. You're in the way, and it's time for you to step aside." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This man had the audacity to show up at my house, uninvited, and demand that I hand over my marriage like it was a business transaction. "You've got some nerve," I said, my voice cold. "I'm just being honest," Marcus replied, his smirk widening. "Lisa's done with you, Ethan. She's with me now. You're holding on to something that's already gone. Why don't you come in?" I said suddenly, stepping aside. Marcus looked surprised, but his arrogance quickly returned. "Sure," he said, walking past me into the house. I closed the door behind him and turned to face him, my jaw tight. "You want to talk? Fine. Let's talk." He made himself comfortable on the couch, leaning back as if he owned the place. "I'll keep it simple," he said, his tone smug. "Lisa and I are in love. She hasn't told you yet because she feels guilty, but she'll come around. The sooner you let go, the better it'll be for everyone." His words were like gasoline on a fire. I could feel my composure slipping, but I forced myself to stay calm, for now. "So, you think you can just walk into my house, into my life, and take what you want?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "It's not about taking," he said, spreading his hands. "It's about Lisa finally being happy. And let's face it, Ethan, you're not making her happy anymore." That was it. The last straw. Before I could think twice, I grabbed him by the collar and yanked him to his feet. His smug expression vanished, replaced by shock and fear. "Listen to me," I said through gritted teeth, my face inches from his. "You don't get to come into my house and disrespect me. You don't get to lecture me about my marriage while sneaking around with my wife behind my back." He tried to pull away, but I tightened my grip. "You think you're some kind of alpha? That you can intimidate me? Newsflash, Marcus. You're nothing but a coward who preys on other people's relationships because you can't build your own." "Ethan," he stammered, his confidence crumbling. I didn't let him finish. I shoved him back onto the couch, my anger boiling over. "Get out of my house," I growled. "Now. And if I ever see you near Lisa or this house again, you'll regret it." Marcus scrambled to his feet, his face pale. "You're making a mistake," he said, trying to regain his composure. "No," I said, my voice steady. "The mistake was yours, thinking you could walk in here and dictate how this ends. I'm the one who decides that. Not you. And not Lisa." Without another word, he walked to the door, his arrogance gone. I followed him, slamming the door shut behind him as he left. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. Marcus thought he could intimidate me, but he underestimated me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but for now, I had made my stance clear. And I wasn't backing down. As Marcus walked out of my house, his so-called dominance shattered. I was left with the storm of emotions that had been building for weeks. The confrontation hadn't just been about him. It was about everything. Lisa's betrayal, my broken trust, and the realization that my marriage was no longer what I thought it was. I sat on the edge of the couch, my fists still clenched, replaying his smug words in my head. Lisa's done with you, Ethan. She's with me now. The sheer audacity of it was infuriating. How had I let things get to this point? How had I missed the signs that my wife and this man were making a mockery of our marriage? But no matter how much I wanted to blame Marcus for what he'd done, the truth was, Lisa had made her own choices. She had opened the door to him, figuratively and literally. She had let him into our lives, and now I had to decide how to deal with the mess she'd created. Lisa came home late that night, as usual. I was still sitting in the living room, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the walls. She walked in, humming softly to herself, her heels clicking against the floor. She stopped short when she saw me. "You're still up?" she asked, her voice a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "Had an interesting visitor tonight." Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing. "Oh? Who?" "Marcus," I said, watching her reaction carefully. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But she quickly masked it with feigned confusion. "Marcus? Why would he come here?" "That's what I wanted to know," I said, leaning forward. "He showed up uninvited, sat on my couch, and told me I should step aside, so you two could be together." Her eyes widened, and she opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't even try to deny it. I know what's been going on, Lisa. I've seen the texts. I've seen the emails. And now, your lover decided to walk into my house and tell me to hand over my marriage. So don't insult me by pretending this isn't what it looks like." She stared at me, her expression shifting between guilt and defiance. "Ethan, it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "Lisa, he sat in that chair and told me you've already made your choice. Are you really going to stand there and tell me he's lying?" She hesitated, and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. "I don't know what you want me to say," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Things haven't been the same between us for a long time, Ethan. I've felt disconnected, lonely." "Lonely?" I repeated, incredulous. "So instead of talking to me about it, you decided to start an affair with Marcus? You didn't just betray me, Lisa. You destroyed us." Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't moved. Not anymore. I had spent weeks agonizing over this, trying to figure out where I went wrong, trying to rationalize her behavior. But the truth was simple. She had made a choice. And now, I was making mine. "I let him walk out of here tonight," I said, standing up and looking her in the eye. "But that doesn't mean I'm letting this go. You need to decide what you want, Lisa, because I'm done playing this game." She opened her mouth to respond, but I walked past her, heading upstairs. I didn't want to hear her excuses or her apologies. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For weeks, I had been caught in a whirlwind of doubt and anger, unsure of how to move forward. But now, things were different. The truth was out in the open, and I no longer felt the need to cling to what was left of our marriage. Marcus had tried to assert his dominance, to take control of my life and my relationship. He thought he could intimidate me, that I would back down. But he was wrong. Lisa had betrayed me, but I wasn't the one who needed to pick up the pieces. This wasn't my mess to fix. I was ready to let go, to take back control of my life, and to remind everyone involved that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. The aftermath of Marcus's visit lingered in the air like a thick fog. I hadn't slept much that night, and by morning, my mind was still racing. Lisa avoided me, spending most of her time locked in the bedroom, pretending to be busy with work calls. I let her have her space, but my thoughts were far from calm. The truth had come out, and there was no going back now. Marcus's arrogance had pushed me to a breaking point, but Lisa's betrayal had cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about the lies, the disrespect, and the way she had treated our marriage like an afterthought. I couldn't sit quietly anymore. It was time to make my next move. Lisa finally emerged from the bedroom that afternoon. She looked hesitant, her eyes darting away from mine as she shuffled into the kitchen. I followed her, leaning against the doorway as she poured herself a glass of water. We need to talk, I said, breaking the silence. She didn't look at me, just nodded and set the glass down on the counter. Okay. I gestured to the dining table. Sit. Reluctantly, she sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Last night, I began, my voice steady but firm. Marcus showed me exactly who he is. And honestly, Lisa, he showed me exactly who you are too. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. Ethan, that's not fair. Not fair. I interrupted, my voice rising. What's not fair is the fact that I've been fighting for this marriage while you've been sneaking around with someone like him. What's not fair is the fact that I've had to sit here, watching you pull away, knowing something was wrong but hoping, praying that I was wrong. And then he has the audacity to show up at my house and demand I hand you over like some prize? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't stop. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you have any idea how much you've destroyed? She wiped her eyes, her voice trembling as she said, Ethan, I never meant for it to get this far. I swear. It started as nothing, just harmless flirting. I didn't think it would. I didn't think I would lose control. Lose control? I repeated bitterly. You didn't just lose control, Lisa. You made a choice. Every text, every lie, every stolen moment with him, that was a choice. And now you're trying to tell me it wasn't intentional? I was lonely, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You've been so distant lately, so focused on work. I felt invisible, Ethan. And Marcus, he made me feel seen. I shook my head, anger bubbling to the surface again. So, instead of talking to me about how you were feeling, you ran to him? Instead of working on our marriage, you decided to blow it up? I didn't mean for it to happen this way, she said, tears streaming down her face. I made a mistake, Ethan. A terrible mistake. But I still love you. I want to fix this. Her words hung in the air, but they felt hollow. Love wasn't enough anymore, not after everything she had done. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I studied her. You want to fix this? I asked, my voice cold. Then tell me, how do you expect me to trust you again? How do you expect me to believe a single word that comes out of your mouth? She opened her mouth to respond but closed it again, unable to come up with an answer. That's what I thought, I said, standing up. I'm done, Lisa. I can't keep doing this. I've spent weeks questioning myself, wondering if I could have done something differently. But the truth is, this isn't on me. It's on you. And now, you have to live with the consequences. I left her sitting there, sobbing quietly at the table, and went outside to clear my head. The cool breeze hit my face as I leaned against the porch railing, staring out at the street. I had made my decision, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss, a painful, necessary loss that would eventually lead to something better. As I stood there, I realized something important. I wasn't just letting go of Lisa. I was letting go of the anger, the pain, and the weight of her betrayal. It was time to start over. Not for her, not for Marcus, but for me. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone take control of my life again. The fallout from Lisa's betrayal and Marcus's audacity was like a shockwave rippling through our lives, shaking everything and everyone around us. It didn't take long for the story to spread, and soon, friends, family, and even neighbors were chiming in with their opinions. I wasn't naive enough to think people wouldn't talk. Betrayal has a way of becoming public, whether you want it to or not. But I hadn't expected just how divided people would be, how they would pick sides as if this were some kind of sport. My sister, Angela, was one of the first to weigh in. She called me the morning after I told her everything, her voice filled with righteous anger. Are you kidding me? She snapped. She let that sleazeball into your life, into your home, and now she has the nerve to cry about feeling lonely? No, Ethan. She doesn't get to play the victim here. Angela's outrage was comforting in a way. She was fiercely loyal, always ready to defend me no matter what. But her anger was also exhausting. Every conversation with her turned into a rant about how I needed to cut Lisa out of my life immediately, how I deserved better, how I should have seen this coming. Don't beat yourself up, she said at one point. But don't waste another second on her, either. She made her bed. Let her lie in it. Lisa's sister, Rachel, took a very different approach. She showed up at my door one afternoon, uninvited, her face etched with concern. "Ethan," she said, stepping inside before I could protest, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms, leaning against the wall. "What is there to talk about, Rachel? Your sister cheated on me. End of story." "It's not that simple," she said, her voice pleading. "Lisa is a mess right now. She knows she messed up, and she's desperate to fix things. She's not a bad person, Ethan. She just made a mistake." "A mistake?" I shot back, my voice rising. "A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store." What Lisa did was a series of choices. Rachel flinched but didn't back down. "I'm not excusing her actions. I'm just saying that people can grow, can change. Don't you think she deserves a chance to make things right?" I stared at her, the anger bubbling up inside me again. She had her chance, Rachel. She had 8 years of chances, and she threw them away. I'm done giving her more. The division wasn't limited to family. Our friends had their own opinions, too. My best friend, Liam, was firmly in my corner. "Ethan, you've got to cut her loose," he said over beers one night. "She's toxic, man. And don't even get me started on Marcus. The guy's a walking cliché. If you ask me, you're better off without either of them." Liam had always been the blunt, no-nonsense type, and his words hit harder than he probably realized. But then there were people like Kate, a mutual friend who tried to play mediator. "Look, I'm not saying what Lisa did was okay," she said during a phone call. "But maybe you should think about why she felt the need to turn to someone else in the first place. Relationships are complicated, Ethan. Maybe this is something you both can work through." Her words stung in a different way, planting seeds of doubt that I didn't want to entertain. Was there something I could have done differently? Could I have prevented all this if I'd paid closer attention? Even my parents weighed in, though they tried to tread lightly. My dad, ever the pragmatist, said, "Son, you need to think about what you want your life to look like. If staying with Lisa means you'll never trust her again, then it's not worth it. But if you think there's a chance to rebuild, that's your call." My mom, on the other hand, was more emotional. "Ethan," she said gently, "marriage is about forgiveness. It's about working through the hard times. Don't let pride stop you from considering all your options." The conflicting opinions were overwhelming, and for a while, I didn't know who to listen to. Everyone seemed to have their own version of what I should do, but none of them understood the depth of the betrayal I felt. None of them had lived through the sleepless nights, the endless lies, the humiliation of watching someone else try to take over my life. In the end, I realized that the only voice that mattered was my own. It didn't matter what Angela, Rachel, Liam, Kate, or even my parents thought. This was my life, my marriage, and my decision. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of clarity. I wasn't going to let anyone, not Lisa, not Marcus, and certainly not the peanut gallery, dictate how I moved forward. This was my fight, and I was ready to take control. The tipping point came during a quiet evening at home. I'd spent the day going through paperwork for the divorce, each signature feeling like a small death. By now, Lisa had moved in with her sister Rachel temporarily, giving me the space I needed. But the weight of everything still hung over me, heavy and unrelenting. Then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was Lisa. The message was simple. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to let her sit in the silence she had created. But another part of me, a part one didn't want to admit existed, wanted answers. Closure. A final reckoning. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, a neutral space where neither of us could retreat to the familiar dynamics of home. When I arrived, Lisa was already there, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked tired, her usually flawless appearance slightly disheveled. It was the first time in years that she looked vulnerable. "Ethan," she said softly as I sat down, "thank you for coming." I didn't respond immediately, just nodded and leaned back in my seat. "You wanted to talk," I said finally. "So talk." She hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her cup. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began. "About everything. About us. About what I've done." I didn't say anything, letting her words hang in the air. "I know I've hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. More than I can ever apologize for. I made choices, selfish, reckless choices, that I'll regret for the rest of my life. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw and genuine in her expression. I let Marcus manipulate me. I let myself believe that he cared about me in a way I thought you didn't anymore. But I was wrong. About him. About everything. I folded my arms, my voice steady but cold. You're not wrong about one thing, Lisa. You made your choices. And those choices destroyed what we had. She winced but nodded. I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed you to know that I see it now. Marcus wasn't what I thought he was. He's been pushing me, pressuring me, to leave you completely, to make this thing between us official. Isn't that what you wanted? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She shook her head quickly. At first, maybe. But now, I see who he really is. He doesn't care about me, Ethan. Not the way you did. He just wanted to win. To take something that wasn't his. I let out a bitter laugh. And you let him. You handed it to him on a silver platter, Lisa. I know, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I know I did. And I'll never forgive myself for it. For a moment, the only sound between us was the faint hum of conversation from the other patrons. I wanted to feel satisfied, vindicated by her regret. But all I felt was emptiness. What do you want from me, Lisa? I asked finally. Why are we here? She hesitated again, her hands trembling. I don't know, she admitted. Maybe I just needed you to hear me. To know that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't erase the lies, the betrayal, the fact that you let another man into our marriage. You made your choices, Lisa. Now you have to live with them. She nodded, her tears falling freely now. I understand, she whispered. I wish I could take it all back. But you can't, I said firmly. And neither can I. I stood up, sliding my chair back with a quiet scrape. I'll see you in court, Lisa. Her head dropped, and she didn't look up as I walked away. That night, as I sat alone in the house that no longer felt like a home, I reflected on our conversation. Lisa's regret was real, but it didn't change what she had done. It didn't heal the wounds or rebuild the trust. And it didn't change the fact that I deserved better. This was the beginning of the end. And for the first time, I felt ready to face it head-on. Not as a broken man, but as someone determined to take back control of his life. The aftermath of my meeting with Lisa left me with a strange mix of emotions. Her regret was clear, but it didn't change the damage she had done. And Marcus? He had shown his true colors long before that. He wasn't the charming, confident man Lisa thought he was. He was a manipulative predator who thrived on the chaos he caused. It wasn't long before Lisa realized the full extent of Marcus's deceit. When she tried to distance herself from him, he turned on her with a vengeance. He began to make her professional life unbearable, excluding her from meetings and undermining her in front of their colleagues. Lisa, once the confident and respected woman I'd fallen in love with, was now the subject of whispers and speculation in her office. I heard about it through a mutual acquaintance, a friend who worked in the same industry. You won't believe what I heard about Marcus, she said over coffee one afternoon. Word is he's been spreading rumors about Lisa, saying she used him to get ahead, and then dropped him when it wasn't convenient anymore. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. Sounds about right, I said. Part of me felt a twisted sense of satisfaction hearing that Marcus was finally being exposed for who he truly was. But another part of me, one I wasn't ready to admit, felt a pang of pity for Lisa. She had played a dangerous game, and now she was paying the price. Lisa called me a few days later, her voice shaky and strained. Ethan, I need to talk to you, she said. I don't think there's anything left to say, Lisa, I replied, keeping my tone firm. It's not about us, she said quickly. It's about Marcus. He's making my life a living hell. I don't know what to do. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. Lisa, this is your mess. You let him into your life. You let him destroy our marriage. Now you have to deal with the consequences. She was silent for a moment before saying, I know. I wanted to tell you that you were right. About everything. Her admission didn't bring me the closure I thought it might. If anything, it left me feeling hollow. I had spent weeks trying to prove to myself that I wasn't the one to blame for what happened. And now that Lisa was confirming it, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. Marcus's downfall was inevitable. Word of his behavior spread quickly, and it wasn't long before his charm wore thin. Colleagues turned on him, clients started pulling their accounts, and his once flawless reputation crumbled under the weight of his arrogance. I watched it all from a distance, detached but oddly at peace. Marcus had tried to assert his dominance over me, over Lisa, over everyone in his orbit. But in the end, his own hubris was his undoing. As for Lisa, she resigned from her job shortly after. The office had become a toxic environment, and she knew she couldn't stay. She moved in with her sister Rachel permanently, leaving the life we had built together behind. She reached out one last time, sending me a long, heartfelt email. She apologized again, not just for the affair, but for the way she had treated me in the years leading up to it. She acknowledged her faults and wished me happiness in the future. I read the email once, then deleted it. The truth was, I didn't need her apologies anymore. I didn't need her regret or her explanations. I had already begun to move on, to rebuild my life on my own terms. Marcus and Lisa were chapters of my story, but they didn't define me. I was free, and for the first time in years, I felt like myself again. The day the divorce was finalized felt strangely anticlimactic. I had expected to feel something monumental, relief, maybe, or a sense of closure, but instead, it was just quiet. I walked out of the courthouse, the papers clutched in my hand, and stood on the steps for a moment, letting the reality sink in. Lisa was no longer my wife. What had once been a life built together was now reduced to signatures and legal documents. The weight of the betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, it had all led to this moment. And now it was over. Or at least that chapter was. In the weeks that followed, I focused on reclaiming my life. Therapy helped me work through the emotions I had buried during the chaos of the past few months. Dr. Bennett, my therapist, encouraged me to stop defining myself by what I had lost and instead focus on what I could gain. It was easier said than done, but little by little, I began to find pieces of myself I thought I had lost. I started running again, hitting the trails early in the morning when the world was still quiet. The steady rhythm of my feet on the ground became a kind of meditation, a reminder that moving forward, literally and figuratively, was possible. I also reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my marriage. Liam, my best friend, dragged me out to bars and trivia nights, determined to remind me that life didn't end at divorce. "You've got a second chance now, Ethan," he said one night over a pint of beer. "Don't waste it." One Saturday, on a whim, I joined a local hiking group. I'd always loved the outdoors, but it was something Lisa had never shared my enthusiasm for. The group met at a nearby trailhead, and as we set off, I found myself talking to a woman named Hannah. She was a teacher, down to earth, and easy to talk to. We bonded over our mutual love of nature and our shared stories of starting over. By the end of the hike, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hannah and I started spending time together, first as friends, then as something more. There was no rush, no pressure, just an ease that I hadn't realized I'd been missing. She didn't try to fix me or fill the void Lisa had left. Instead, she simply accepted me for who I was, scars and all. One evening, as we sat on a hillside watching the sunset, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, it had all shaped me, but it didn't define me. I had learned to let go, to rebuild, and to trust again. "Penny for your thoughts?" Hannah asked, nudging me with her elbow. I smiled, looking out at the horizon. "Just thinking about how far I've come." She nodded, her hand slipping into mine. "You've come a long way, Ethan." And for the first time, I truly believed it. My past was a part of me, but it wasn't all of me. There was still so much life to live, so many possibilities waiting on the horizon. As the sun dipped below the trees, I realized that this wasn't just an ending. It was a beginning, a new chapter, one that I was ready to write on my own terms. And this time, I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I was ready to embrace it.